Mosquito or P-38 Lightning. If you could only fly one, which would you choose? I've read thousands of your comments on the last video, thousands, and the most honest answer keeps coming back to 6 words one of you wrote that stuck with me ever since. Suit the aircraft to the task. So that's what we're going to do today. Not spec sheets, not speed numbers, not a bar chart with little airplane silhouettes on it. What these aircraft actually felt like, through the words of the men who flew them and the families who lived with their absence. And I'll tell you right now, there's one thing about the Mosquito's wooden airframe that gave it an advantage no metal fighter on Earth could match. We'll get there. But first, the Lightning deserves its moment, and I'm going to give it one. The P-38 owned the Pacific, full stop. Over those vast, merciless stretches of open ocean, where a single-engine failure meant ditching into water that might as well have been concrete at approach speed, the Lightning's twin Allisons weren't a luxury. They were a life insurance policy. Major Richard Bong, a farm kid from Poplar, Wisconsin, racked up 40 confirmed kills in a P-38, making him the highest-scoring American ace of the entire war. Major Thomas McGuire followed with 38. Both flew Lightnings. Both fought in the Pacific. And on April 18, 1943, 16 P-38s from the 339th Fighter Squadron launched from Guadalcanal on one of the most audacious interception missions ever attempted, Operation Vengeance. They flew over 400 miles at wavetop height, burning through carefully calculated fuel reserves to intercept Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber over Bougainville. They got him. Changed the course of the Pacific War in a single pass. And here's a detail that doesn't get said enough. The man who designed the P-38 was a 27-year-old engineer named Clarence Kelly Johnson. 27. He'd go on to found Lockheed's Skunk Works division and design the U-2 spy plane, flown in secrecy over the Soviet Union at altitudes no interceptor could reach, and a succession of aircraft that pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible. The line from the P-38's twin-boom silhouette to the most advanced aircraft of the Cold War runs straight through one man's career. That's not a footnote. That's a legacy. So when P-38 advocates say their aircraft was special, they're right. It was a switchblade. Lethal, elegant, purpose-built. But the Mosquito was a Swiss Army knife. And when you open every blade, you start to understand why one of you called it the forgotten legend, and why that phrase won't leave my head. Picture London, autumn of 1938. The Air Ministry is pouring everything into metal monoplanes with gun turrets. The accepted doctrine says bombers need to shoot their way through enemy defences. And a 56-year-old aircraft designer named Geoffrey de Havilland walks in with a proposal so audacious that it nearly ends his reputation. He wants to build a bomber out of wood, birch plywood, balsa core, spruce longerons, casein glue. No defensive armament, no turrets, no gunners, no guns. Its only defence would be speed. The ministry thought he'd lost his mind. They called the project Freeman's Folly, after Air Chief Marshal Sir Wilfrid Freeman, the one senior official brave enough, or reckless enough, to authorise development under specification B1/40. Freeman staked his professional reputation on a wooden aeroplane that most of his colleagues believed would humiliate the RAF. On November 25, 1940, the prototype DH-98, painted yellow primer, looking like nothing that belonged in a war, lifted off the grass at Hatfield, with Geoffrey de Havilland's own son at the controls. It was faster than a Spitfire. The folly was no folly at all. And de Havilland's design philosophy was quietly brilliant in ways that went far beyond aerodynamics. Wood didn't compete with the aluminium supply chain feeding every Spitfire and Lancaster rolling off production lines. Mosquitoes could be built by furniture craftsmen from Parker Knoll, by piano builders from the London Piano Company, people whose hands already knew timber grain and laminated surfaces under stress. The fuselage went together in two moulded half-shells, pressed and bonded on concrete moulds, then joined along the centre line. No rivet-by-rivet tedium. The crew was just two, pilot and navigator, side by side in a cockpit that felt more like a racing car than a bomber. Every pound not spent on turret gunners went into fuel, speed, or bombs. By war's end, 7,781 Mosquitoes had been built across Britain, Canada, and Australia. They served in 105 RAF squadrons. 105. In roles that would have made the Air Ministry skeptics choke on their tea. Let's count them. Day bomber, night bomber, night fighter, day fighter, fighter bomber, pathfinder and target marker, photo reconnaissance, maritime strike, anti-shipping with coastal command, intruder operations over Luftwaffe airfields, high-altitude weather reconnaissance, electronic warfare with 100 Group, covert SOE agent insertion into occupied Europe. No other airframe in the war, Allied or Axis, filled that many roles that effectively. Not the Ju-88, not the Beaufighter, not the P-38. None of them came close. So let's go mission by mission. Suit the aircraft to the task. The Mosquito went to war alone. Less than a year after that prototype flight, the PR.I, the photo reconnaissance variant, stripped of all armament, cameras fitted into the bomb bay, entered service with No. 1 Photographic Reconnaissance Unit at RAF Benson in autumn 1941. This was de Havilland's philosophy in its purest form. No guns, no formation, no wingman, just speed. And what those lone aircraft brought home shaped the entire war. Mosquitoes photographed the V-weapon research facilities at Peenemünde, producing the first hard evidence that led Bomber Command to launch its massive raid on August 17th to 18th, 1943, a strike that delayed the German rocket program by critical weeks. Before D-Day, PR Mosquitoes methodically mapped every gun emplacement, every concrete obstacle, every flooded estuary along the Normandy coast. Without those photographs, the invasion planning couldn't have happened. Period. Pilots who flew these missions described them as the loneliest flying of the war. No formation to hide in, no wingman watching your six, just the steady drone of twin Merlins at altitude, the cold seeping in despite the heated suit. Your condensation trails streaming behind you like a billboard telling every fighter controller in Germany exactly where you were. And if something caught you, push the throttles forward, pray the speed margin held. That was it. That was all you had. One veteran, a grandfather who flew 78 Mosquito missions, described his aircraft simply as an unusually fast kite. 78 missions. In an aircraft some people thought was a joke because it was made of wood. Now give the P-38 its due. The F-5 Lightning was a capable photo recon platform too, and it served well. But it couldn't match the Mosquito's altitude or speed advantage in that role. Not even close. The late-war PR-34 variant had an operational range of nearly 3,500 miles. It was the benchmark. Everything else was measured against it. And then there was Pathfinder Force. No. 8 PFF Group Bomber Command, formed August 15, 1942. Their job was terrifyingly simple to describe and almost impossible to execute. Fly ahead of the main bomber stream, find the target in the dark, mark it with coloured flares so the heavies bombing behind you could actually hit something. If you got it wrong, 1,000 bombers dropped their loads on empty fields. Every mission, every night, the accuracy of the entire strategic bombing offensive rested on the shoulders of Mosquito crews. They used the OBO navigation system, 2 ground-based radar stations in England, codenamed Cat and Mouse, that guided an aircraft along a precise circular arc to its bomb release point with unprecedented precision. And the Mosquito was the ideal OBO platform, because it could fly high enough and fast enough to stay within the system's effective range while surviving the defences that chewed up slower aircraft. The Light Night Striking Force sent Mosquitoes to Berlin on 170 separate occasions during the war, sometimes on consecutive nights for weeks at a stretch. Berliners came to know the nightly visits with weary, bitter familiarity, and the routine nature of these raids was something that heavy bomber crews, losing friends at unspeakable rates, could barely comprehend. Then the precision raids. Amiens Prison, February 18, 1944. Operation Jericho. Mosquitoes from 487 Squadron RNZAF, 464 Squadron RAAF, and 21 Squadron RAF, flying at rooftop height, breached the walls of the prison to free French resistance members facing imminent execution by the Gestapo. The Shell House Raid, Copenhagen, March 21, 1945. Mosquitoes from 140 Wing struck the Gestapo headquarters near the centre of a populated city, threading between buildings, civilian lives on either side of every bomb released. These weren't conventional bombing missions. They were surgical operations, flown in wood and glue. One of you told me your mother built Mosquitoes at the de Havilland Canada plant at Downsview, near Toronto, Ontario. She knew something most people didn't. The engines and completed airframes were shipped to Britain on separate vessels. Different vessels, different convoys. Because if a U-boat got one ship, you'd lose engines or airframes, not both. That's how seriously they took the supply chain for an aircraft some people still dismiss as a furniture project. Maritime strike with Coastal Command. Electronic warfare with 100 Group, carrying jamming equipment and radar countermeasures to blind German defences before the main bomber stream arrived. Covert SOE drops, inserting agents into occupied Europe under cover of darkness. The kind of missions that stayed classified for decades. Blade after blade after blade on that Swiss army knife. And we haven't even gotten to the one that changes everything. The Night Fighter. Imagine this. It's 1943. You're sitting in the right-hand seat of a Mosquito NF-12, shoulder to shoulder with your pilot, in a cockpit so dark you can barely see your own hands. The instrument lights are dimmed to almost nothing. Any bright light would destroy the night vision you've spent 30 minutes building on the ground, sitting in a blacked-out room before the sortie. Your world is the faint green glow of the AI Mark 8 radar scope in front of you. A cathode ray tube, nothing more. Everything depends on what that scope tells you. The smell. Nobody talks about the smell. Plywood and aircraft dope, that sharp chemical sweetness of the cellulose coating on the fabric surfaces. Hot engine oil bleeding back through the cowling seals. The rubbery tang of oxygen from your mask. Hydraulic fluid. These aren't the smells of a metal aircraft. They're the smells of a workshop, a woodworker's bench, translated into something hurtling through total darkness. Ground control vectors you toward a contact. You pick it up on the scope, a faint blip at maximum range, drifting across the green sweep. You call the bearing. Your pilot adjusts, so gently you barely feel it. The blip strengthens, range closing, 2 miles, 1 mile, half a mile, and then there. Against a sky that isn't quite black, the darker-than-dark silhouette of a Heinkel, exhaust stubs glowing faint orange in the night. Visual identification. Positive. Your pilot fires. Wing Commander Brands Burbridge of 85 Squadron became the RAF's highest-scoring night fighter ace with 21 confirmed kills. Every single one from the cockpit of a Mosquito. Every one at night. His navigator, Flight Lieutenant Bill Skelton, could take a crew from first radar contact to guns firing in under 60 seconds. Veterans of night fighter squadrons described the pilot-navigator bond as something beyond professional. Intimacy born of shared dependence in the dark. When V-1 flying bombs started falling on London from June 1944, Mosquito night fighters from 96, 219 and 418 squadrons were among the few interceptors fast enough to chase down the pilotless cruise missiles in darkness, accounting for hundreds of kills through that desperate summer and autumn. And now, the reveal. That wooden airframe, the birch, the balsa, the spruce, the casein glue, the thing the skeptics mocked, the thing that earned Geoffrey de Havilland a reputation for eccentricity and his supporters the label of fools? Wood is largely transparent to radio frequency energy. In the wave bands used by every radar system of the Second World War, British Chainhome, German Freya, German Würzburg, airborne Liechtenstein sets, metal acts like a mirror. Every aluminum skin panel, every steel spar, every rivet on a conventional aircraft bounces radar pulses straight back to the receiver, painting a bright, unmistakable blip on the operator's scope. Wood doesn't do that. It absorbs and transmits a significant portion of the radar energy that strikes it, letting the pulse pass through instead of bouncing back. The Mosquito's wooden fuselage and wings contributed almost nothing to its radar signature. The Merlins, the propeller discs, the cowlings, the landing gear, the metal components still reflected. So it wasn't invisible. But its composite radar return was consistent with something far smaller than a twin-engine aircraft. To a Würzburg operator on the ground, or a Liechtenstein operator in a German night fighter, the Mosquito appeared as a faint, intermittent blip that could vanish into ground clutter or be dismissed as noise. Surviving Luftwaffe night fighter pilots confirmed it after the war. The Mosquito was a nightmare to find on radar. It seemed to appear from nowhere, strike, and vanish before anyone could organize a response. German ground-based radar operators reported the same frustration. Weak returns, unreliable tracks, contacts lost entirely at low altitude against terrain clutter. Geoffrey de Havilland never designed for this. He chose wood for supply chain reasons, for construction speed, for the availability of furniture craftsmen. The radar advantage was a happy accident, a serendipitous gift of physics that no one involved in the original design fully understood or intended. But there it is, the original low-observable combat aircraft, decades before anyone used the word stealth. Decades before the F-117 Nighthawk flew over Baghdad in January 1991, using angular geometry and radar-absorbing materials to achieve what a wooden aeroplane had stumbled upon by accident over the blacked-out cities of wartime Europe. The very thing people laughed at was keeping crews alive in the dark. So why doesn't the Mosquito get the respect it earned? Partly because the Spitfire consumed all the oxygen in British aviation mythology. The Battle of Britain gave it a story so powerful, so clean, that every other RAF aircraft lived in its shadow. Partly because American post-war cultural dominance meant the bombers and fighters that filled cinema screens were American, while the Mosquito never received a cultural monument equal to its service. Partly, and this is the cruel irony, because the Mosquito's greatest strength worked against it in memory. Versatility doesn't make headlines. Specialization does. The P-38 gets remembered as the Pacific's dominant long-range fighter. Simple story, one sentence. The Mosquito's story needs a paragraph. It was a night fighter and a bomber and a pathfinder and a reconnaissance platform and a covert operations aircraft and a maritime strike weapon and... People's eyes glaze over. A Swiss Army knife doesn't have a single iconic image. A switchblade does. But the people who flew them knew. 78 missions in a wooden aircraft, and the man who survived them all reduced the entire experience to 5 words. An unusually fast kite. That's the Mosquito. Too fast to catch, too versatile to categorize, too humble to brag. The forgotten legend, the wooden wonder. And the P-38 Lightning? A magnificent switchblade, designed by a genius who'd go on to build the future of aviation, flown by aces who changed the course of the Pacific War. It deserves every ounce of the fame it carries. Suit the aircraft to the task. That was always the right answer. If your family has a Mosquito story, or a Lightning story, or any aircraft story, this comment section is the place for it. These planes deserve to be remembered by the people who knew them best. Subscribe if these stories matter to you. We'll keep telling them.